What is the longest you've gone without knowing a person's name? Work in a pharmacy. A young woman, say late teens early 20s, came up and asked to pick up her grandmother's prescription. I said no problem. What's her name? She looked at me with a blank face, asked me to hold on and called her family. Most likely over a decade. I'm in the UK and I've got to know many a bar acquaintance down my local pub. Over time you get to know about their work, hobbies, likes and dislikes. You get to know how many kids they have, how many times they have been married, etc etc. Then a friend from out of town visits you. And as you do in the UK, you go to the pub. Lo and behold, your pub acquaintance is there and you introduce your pal from out of town, only to realize you know everything about your pub pal, everything except their bloody name. A whole school year, I knew their names. I just didn't know which twin was which and they weren't identical. I have two cousins named Matthew and Martin. They are not twins and don't look anything like each other, but I have no idea which one is which. 2 years is the longest so far. I used to be a club promoter and I had a guy that bought tickets from me for every event he went to. He told me his name when I first met him, but I forgot it soon after he told me. Meeting lots of people makes it hard to remember names, especially when I don't even know if I'll ever see them again, so what's the point of remembering everyone's names? After a certain point I saw him out partying often enough, but it was past the point where I could ask him his name without it being awkward. I had him saved in my phone as Sir Prince Albert, since he told me about his piercing so that I'd know who was texting me if we ever texted each other, but I didn't think to add his name since I wasn't sure what it was, so that was no help. Eventually we ended up at a party together, and some people walked in and asked, "Hey, have you seen Phil?" After not remembering meeting anyone that night named Phil, I said no, I don't think there's a Phil here. Then that guy whose name I couldn't remember came up and joined the group, and said, "I'm right here. Don't worry, Scratcher Pete, these guys are cool, I invited them." At that moment I finally found out his name and I played it off as, "Oh okay, well if they are your friends then I guess it's cool if they stay," and just went with it. I've lived in my townhouse for almost 5 years now, and I don't know the name of the guy who lives directly across from me. I have pretty regular interactions with most of my neighbors, but I've never talked with this one guy beyond just exchanging pleasantries while passing each other. When I moved in and first met him, I immediately forgot his name. I was almost positive he said it was Mike, so I went about 4 years just assuming that was probably his name, but not quite confident enough to actually call him Mike. Then a few months ago I was talking to some other neighbors in the parking lot when he walked by, and my other neighbors called out, "Hey, name that is not Mike." So it was confirmed that this guy's name is not, in fact, Mike, and I was relieved I hadn't been calling him that for the past 5 years. But I immediately forgot again what his name actually is, so now all I know is that it is something other than Mike. Maybe I'll learn his name by the time I've lived here 10 years. Why don't you get someone to break your arm? Then you can get it plastered up and ask him to sign your cast. Think I'm going to try this. Get well soon, your friendly neighbor, F. Just check his mail. That's what I finally did, on the sly, after hooking up with a lady for months, but only knowing her first name. This was years ago. Frankly, how often does someone's full name come out when you're bar hopping and jumping in bed? And after enough time, you can't ask right. Thankfully 6 months in, I saw some junk mail on her table with her full name. This was my favorite episode of Seinfeld. A whole date. Someone fixed us up but my dude never told me her name, just the address she wanted me to pick her up. I didn't have guts to ask her name between the date. Edit, she became a longtime girlfriend after that date and we laughed about it forever. Once made it 4 to 5 dates including staying at her place twice. I just had her saved in my phone as cutie, bar X, and then avoided saying her name. Finally the second time at her place she went to the bathroom and sneaked a peek at her stack of mail to find her name. The face when you think you're calling her name and it's actually her roommate's name. I've been on the receiving end of this. My nickname in college was the Mayor, and I had people I had known for years coming up to me at my graduation saying, "I had no idea your name was actually Dan." My cousin gave birth to a baby girl like a year ago and I still don't know her name. Maybe you can wait a few years until she's 4 or 5 and ask if she can spell her name. She'd be excited to do it for you. Dog park people. We see each other and talk almost every day, but they are always dogs named mum/dad. I'm sure at some point their name come up, but I just keep forgetting. I'm a waiter. There are lots of customers who are regulars and I've known them for years, some of them close to a decade. Very few of them I know their names. Some of them get nicknames amongst the staff. Some favorites are Twix Man, as he would always leave a Twix chocolate bar with a tip. Emma and Stacy, 2 sisters who used to come in a lot. I know their names but not which one is which. The Vegans, a young couple who were vegan but really cool. I do know their names now to be fair. I had a construction crew that came to town for a couple months. Since they were out of towners, and we were the only restaurant in town, they ate 3 meals a day every day where I was working. We called them the boss, the cowboy and the convict. The boss would come in every morning, give orders and line out the day. The cowboy, Wrangler jeans, boots and a cowboy hat. The convict, white t-shirt and jeans every day. Kept his head down and wrapped his arms around his plate when he ate. This was 20 years ago and I still don't know their names. 10 years, the people from my office but from different division. They seem to know me and often call me out when I passed by, but I don't know their names and at this point it seems awkward to ask them. My parents. 5 years at least. I thought my mum was called auntie because my sister-in-law called her that, and didn't find out that wasn't true until I was 6 or 7. I remember asking my mum what my middle name is. So I really didn't know my own full name. At work we have this old dude who drives shuttles. His name is Ron. I say, "Hey Ron," every time I see him. 5 years down the road I see Ron standing next to another old dude. Turns out we have 2 shuttle drivers. I've been saying hi Ron to the other guy 50% of the time for 5 years. Does this count? The guy round the corner I buy weed from has just been the weed guy for 3+ years. A lot of us know weed guy. Years. You must not own a dog. I know all the neighborhood dogs' names, but their human counterparts. Nope. It's too late to ask at this point. Dating my girlfriend for a year. Still don't know her name. Premarital name knowledge is a sin. I once worked with a man for 3 years and didn't learn his name. Best friend I ever had. We still never talk sometimes. My father. So obviously like every other kid, I always called dad dad, but I must have been about 6 or 7 when I learned my father's name was Roy. Everyone called him Roy, that was the name on his driver's license. I knew that was his name. When I was around 12, we moved from Texas to another state. After living there a few years we ended up taking a trip with some close friends of my parents and their kids. Now, since moving, my dad had gotten a new license in the new state. As we all sat down and waited for the plane to take off, one of the attendants came over the intercom. "Will Raul come to the front of the aircraft?" I can't remember the problem, but I wasn't paying attention, because I didn't know a Raul. Until my father stood up and headed for the front of the plane. I sat there stunned, trying to process why my father was suddenly known as Raul. As it turns out, in Texas you can have your nickname on your license, and the English version of Raul was Roy, so for my father's entire life he had Roy put on his license. When we moved, he had to have it changed back to Raul. I buy beer from a family-owned convenience store almost daily. The guy that works behind the counter says my name every time I walk in, and I call him man. It's been at least 4 years at this point. I'm in too deep to ask now. 1 year and still going. It's my piano teacher. He told me his name once and we don't really talk, and I call him stuff like you. Try calling him Maestro, see how that goes. I lived next door to an elderly woman for about 10 years. Her name was Nellie and she was always very sweet. Her daughter came over one day and told me Willie died. I told her I didn't know a Willie but I was very sorry for her loss. She looked at me like I was nuts, and said I'd lived next door to her mom for 10 years. Turns out I misheard her, and she had bad hearing. We both heard what we expected to hear. 2 years. When I was in college I smoked and played hacky sack with a guy from another program every day. 5 days a week I would talk to him at least at once or twice daily and we would spend 20 minutes or so together. I called him buddy and he called me man. I was confused about my grandmother's name until I was 17. When I was like 13, I had my first boyfriend who was a neighbor. He egregiously pronounced my name wrong the first time I met him, and so did his family as a result, and for some reason I didn't want to correct him. We dated for a year and I never said anything. I spent 18 months at my current job with a guy calling me Dave. One day he called me over and some other guys looked at him like he was nuts. When he found out my real name, he was upset and spent the next 6 months apologizing. Here's the thing, I didn't mind, because I'm useless at remembering names. It's 2 years since he stopped apologizing. But he wears his ID badge back to front, and to this day I'm not entirely sure what he's called. Over a decade. Me and my brother had a nanny from when I was born until I was about 12. She is like my second mom. Her name is Edna, except it actually isn't. It is Emilia, and it took me years to find out. Apparently when she introduced herself to her previous employers, they misheard Edna for Emilia. And she just rolled with it. So when they recommended her to my parents, she was called Edna. So everyone in the family called her Edna, and she was fine with it. I don't remember ever calling her Emilia. Even when I found out. She told me I could keep with Edna, cause that was just what we were used to, and she was fine with this name. 37 years and counting. A guy 2 years ahead of me in high school. We took Spanish 1 together in my freshman year. He has always called me Busk and I call him the ever popular dude. We wound up going to the same university and the same major. I've since seen him about a dozen times at high school reunions and social functions in my old high school friend group. I last saw him at a funeral for a classmate. I'm pretty sure we will both go to our graves not knowing each other's name, and I think we are both okay with that. So, funny story. I met a girl and really hit it off with her, but she never told me her name. We texted a ton, made plans to go on a date, and I was extremely excited. She delved really deep into her life story and experiences, but still no name. I knew her first pet's name, the street she grew up on, and basically every other security question. I could tell you the age that she decided what her career path would be, or her favorite ice cream flavor. It was so jarring. It was some real Seinfeldian shit, I'm telling you. I deliberated on how to find out a name, asking friends and loved ones advice on this. On a side note, my friends give shit advice it turns out. My cousin finally said to me, "Ask her, you idiot," and so I did. She ghosted me. I guess it wasn't meant to be. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more daily Reddit videos.